Is there a biblical way to confront injustice? Psalm 58, our Psalm of the Week, doesn't say everything about how Christians should face injustice, but in connection with the other imprecatory Psalms or Psalms of judgment, this Psalm does give us several principles that should guide us as we face injustice. First of all, it teaches us to decry injustice. The themes of Psalm 58, of the nature of unjust leadership, as well as the downfall of the unjust, these are unpleasant themes. But the themes are well suited to the unpleasant world in which we live. We have to be realistic about the injustice that we face and refuse to be quiet about it. One pastor has written this about Psalm 58. Those leading comfortable lives may be troubled by verses 6 through 10, which describes the downfall of the unjust. But the Psalms refuse to allow us to get used to the scandal of evil in high places. Don't get used to scandals. Don't become acclimated of injustice or accept the fact that those who lead and those who judge are going to look out for their own interests instead of others. Decry injustice like the psalmist does. Number two, pray for justice rather than taking vengeance. It seems like Psalm 58 was written during the time when David was fleeing from Saul. Psalm 57 and Psalm 59 on either side of it have historical references that link the Psalms to that time period. If so, if the psalm is directed against Saul and others who were assaulting David at this time, then all of the evidence demonstrates that David resisted opportunities to return evil for evil, while instead relying on God to act. We see that, for example, in 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 1 through 7. David here is praying for justice. He is at the same time refusing to take personal vengeance, and so must we. And we can do that because of the third principle. Third, expect God to judge the unjust. Psalm 58 is addressed to gods, little g, who judge others wickedly. If the judgment in Psalm 58 against these judging gods, these judging leaders, if that judgment seems harsh, we need to remember that those who lead will be judged more strictly. James says that in chapter 3, verse 1. Those who lead others astray, those who refuse to practice biblical justice toward those they are leading, ought, in Jesus' own words in Matthew chapter 18, verse 6, ought to prefer to be drowned in the sea with a millstone tied around their neck rather than face God's judgment. And so God, throughout Scripture, as well here in Psalm 58, helps us to expect God to judge the unjust. And he even supplies images that, as in this case, are harsh and very unpleasant in order to help us recognize the certainty of the judgment that God will bring against the unjust, which allows us to pray for justice rather than take personal vengeance. And then number four, rather than just looking outward in with these sorts of psalms, we should look inward. Apply imprecatory psalms to yourself. Right, Psalm 58 is a warning psalm. It is addressed to those who are silent to the pleas for injustice. Those pleas fall on deaf ears, verses 4 and 5 tell us. It's a warning psalm, but it's also a warning for us. Right? Paul picks up on the comparison in this psalm between unjust leaders and poisonous snakes, verse 4, and applies it to all of us. Romans 3, verse 13. We are no better by nature than they are, those who practice injustice, Romans 3 through 9. So we need to apply this imprecatory psalm to ourselves and be warned against practicing injustice ourselves. Now, obviously, in a sinless world, Psalm 58 wouldn't exist. But because of sin, we can be thankful, as verse 11 says, that surely there is a God who judges on the earth. And he judges better than those gods who refuse to hear the pleas of the hurting. And he judges with sternness those who refuse to bend the knee to him and humble themselves before him. But those who trust in Jesus can be thankful that we have as our judge a loving, protective, sacrificial older brother. Let's listen to Psalm 58. Addressed to the choir master according to Do Not Destroy, a miktam of David. Do you indeed decree what is right, you gods? Do you judge the children of man uprightly? No, in your hearts you devise wrongs. Your hands deal out violence on earth. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray from birth, speaking lies. They have venom like the venom of a serpent, like the deaf adder that stops its ear so that it does not hear the voice of charmers or of the cunning enchanter. O God, break the teeth in their mouths. Tear out the fangs of the young lions, O Lord. Let them vanish like water that runs away. When he aims his arrows, let them be blunted. Let them be like the snail that dissolves into slime, like the stillborn child who never sees the sun. Sooner than your pots can feel the heat of thorns, whether green or ablaze, may he sweep them away. The righteous will rejoice when he sees the vengeance. He will bathe his feet in the blood of the wicked. Mankind will say, surely there is a reward for the righteous. Surely there is a God who judges on earth.